And good afternoon, everybody. Buenos dias to everybody that's joining us in this webinar. It is a pleasure for me to be your host and moderator. We're going to talk today about uh, perspectives on the progression and institutionalization of LSAMP best practices. And we have a great panel of individuals who are participating in this event. The panelists are Dr. Karen Butler-Purry from Texas A&M, Dr. Ernest Chavez from Colorado State University, Dr. Lisa Hammersley from California State University at Sacramento, and Dr. LeRoy Jones II from Chicago State University. We're getting some instructions on the side. I just want to make sure that we can do this effectively. So what I wanted to do first is to mention a few things about our program. We are celebrating 30 years of existence. The Louis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation began in 1991 with the idea of assisting universities and colleges in diversifying the nation's STEM workforce by increasing the number of individuals from historically underrepresented backgrounds who are pursuing STEM baccalaureate and graduate degrees. The historically underrepresented populations, of course, are African Americans, Alaska Natives, American Indians, Hispanics or Latinos, and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. Our program is named after the late Louis Stokes, who was a leader of the civil rights movement and served 15 terms, that's 30 years in the House of Representatives, representing the east side of Cleveland, Ohio. So we are going to spend the next 40 minutes talking about perspectives on the progression and institutionalization of LSAMP best practices. So our guest speakers are leaders of long-serving alliances, Texas A&M University System, LSAMP, the California State University LSAMP, the Colorado Wyoming LSAMP, and the Illinois LSAMP. As I mentioned before, our experts have agreed to talk to us about this important topic. And I should say also that not only are there friends and colleagues who I have worked with alongside, they are also culture bearers. Each one of them has a wealth of knowledge, an oral history about LSAMP. And we cannot do justice to everything that they know in about an hour or so, but we will probe their knowledge and through a number of key questions that we have for them. The idea then is to have these individuals and ask them particular question, and then everybody in the panel can also provide their perspective on that question. And then at the end, we will open it up for questions from the public. So if everybody's okay, then we will start with Dr. LeRoy Jones II. The question for you is, what is the vision of your alliance, and did this vision change with time? Dr. Jones.
Ben, thank you so much for the question, and also I'd like to thank the organizers for pulling this together. I certainly think that it's a very important topic. I'm looking forward to the conversation. For the Illinois Alliance, our vision, as well as I'm sure with our alliances, are in line with the congressional mandate, which you stated a little bit earlier. So for the 28 years, that we've been involved with this particular program, it has always been, to come up with initiatives to diversify the workforce. And we know that we do that through recruiting, retention, progression, and graduation. I think what has changed over time is the initiatives to get there. So for example, when we're a very early alliance, we focused on recruiting. Then, we moved to recruiting and retention, and recruiting, retention, and progression, and so on, and so on. As the alliance, got a little bit earlier, and then also, that change, as it grew and the culture grew and different partners, came in. So long story short, for us, the vision has always been there to diversify the workforce, but the approach to getting there through the initiatives, whether it's an academic, social, or professionalism activities, has changed over time to affect the goal.
Your alliance has been online for how long now?
So it's been 28 years. So we're established in 1993.
Fantastic. We have other panelists that may want to add to what Dr. Jones said.
The CSU LSAMP, I think Dr. Jones really clearly outlined how we've progressed, where the original vision stays the same, but what our approaches have varied. I think the thing that really for us is seen, and the next question will address it a bit more, is a focus on academic support, helping students retain students, and then thinking about professionalization, research experiences, growing that. Yeah. And then, now we have this dual goal of increasing the number of baccalaureate degrees in STEM for URM students, but also increasing the number of graduate degrees, specifically PhDs in STEM. So we've evolved to really be looking at that final outcome as well. And now we're also looking more closely at how we can take everything that we do and build into the sort of research area, into broadening participation research, and become a hub for that research, at least in the CSU, and hopefully for LSAMP as a whole nationally.
So undergraduate research has been a keystone for cornerstone for the program overall. California State in particular has had a significant number of students participating every year. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've had around 800 to 900 students participating in research a year. And then more students, actually, well, let's just call it about 800 or 900 in undergraduate students. And obviously that's a difficult thing to do. We have about 3,000 participants a year in the Alliance as a whole. Research experiences for undergraduates is possibly one of the most expensive things you can do with a grant-funded project, because we want our students to be freed from other work responsibilities to be able to do this work. That's often a huge barrier. What we've done is we've kind of acknowledged the work that our campus coordinators do, not just in finding LSAMP funding for students, but finding research opportunities for students, connecting them with other funded projects. So we acknowledge the students conducting research directly funded by the grant, and then students that we, because of our efforts, have placed in other research. So we're trying to leverage existing programs within the system and then nationally to really get our students out, getting that hands-on experience that they need.
Fantastic, Dr. Hammersley. Thank you so much. Dr. Chavez, would you like to add your perspective on the vision of your alliance?
Certainly. So I agree with what Dr. Jones and Dr. Hammersley has mentioned. I'll speak about the research component for us in just a second. One of the additional things we have, of course, which has increased, is working with our two-year institutions to increase transfer, which was a new kind of development, even though we had community colleges involved, the emphasis on transfer issues and what that might mean as our student, in particular, as the overrepresentation of students of color in community colleges and then moving to our institutions. One of the things we did to increase research participation, we were particularly concerned with the summer break and the extent to which students, that hiatus between spring and fall semesters and having to work and do all of the other things that they had to do. So we try to emphasize our summer research as well as ongoing research participation during the year. And it is expensive, and we've also leveraged, but one of the things we did to leverage was to work with all of our REU programs across the entire state, and got permission from all but 2 of them to accept our students into the REU program. And we would fund them because the REUs have gotten somewhat rigid in their GPA responsibility requirements. Ours are a little bit lower, and I've been arguing with them that you give me a 2.8 student who's close to that 3.0, you give them a good solid research experience, and you're gonna light the fire underneath them. And so we've been focusing and emphasizing that kind of work. We had 110 summer research participants last summer, even with COVID.
That's pretty amazing, and that's part of our lessons learned, right? That you give an opportunity to an underrepresented minority student, and chances are that student will fly. Thank you, Dr. Butler-Purry. Would you like to add a statement on the vision of your alliance? I'm always fascinated by what Texas A&M is doing in East Texas and Central Texas.
So yes, so we have been around since 1991, and I think I would probably echo some of the things that have been said. And so I think there were 2 points that I thought I would add. I think one thing that we have worked really hard to do is really to collaborate across the campus, and really hopefully try to infuse what we're doing throughout the campus. I would say the second thing is really perhaps that we have been able to explore and maybe discover best practices that then later have been adapted and scaled up across our campus. You talked about undergraduate research. I think all 3 of our main alliance institutions have now university undergraduate research offices. As an example, we were in the first group of bridge to doctorate groups awarded in 2003, and we've actually had I think 13 cohorts. And I think that we really have discovered some really good best practices, and many of those findings served as a foundation for actually our NSF Alliance for Graduate Education for Professoriate Award that was first granted in 2015. And so I think those have been 2 things in addition to what has been said that we have worked to try to do.
So there you go. These are the collective visions of 4 outstanding alliances. I would like to move on to the second question, and I'm going to ask each one of the participants to actually tell us when they joined their alliance. So the second question essentially has to do with the programmatic activities. What are the main activities on your campuses, on your alliances, and how did they evolve over time? For this, I'm going to ask Dr. Hammersley to start the conversation. Dr. Hammersley.
There we go, unmute. Okay. So yeah, I think really our activities have evolved over time over the arc that Dr. Jones described, where our focus was initially on student recruitment and retention, academic support, and then starting to think towards training for future careers and graduate programs in the hopes of creating a professoriate that reflects the diversity of our student bodies, the long-term goal. So we're an alliance of 23 campuses. I personally joined, I think about 10 years ago. The years go by really quickly now, as an associate project director, and then took over as the lead project director, I think about 8 or 9 years ago now. One of the things we've done in our most recent funding cycles is acknowledge the fact that we have 23 campuses in the CSU system, and each one is quite different. We have urban campuses, we've got more agricultural schools, we've got campuses that are quite selective and those that really are not. And each one has different projects going on, and we want to be able to take our NSF dollars and leverage them as widely as possible. So we want our campuses to be able to provide a set of activities that reflect what their students need at their campus and how we can most help. So we created a sort of grid. There are two types of campus: those who are really student support focused, actually three kinds of campus, those that are really student research focused, professional development focused, where the student support programs are already firmly in place at those campuses. And then a number of our campuses identify as both. And then we have a series of activities under those headings. So for student academic support, we're looking at supplemental instruction in all of its various forms. There are a million names for it, so I'm using the umbrella term there for supplemental instruction. Let me think. So help with books, textbooks and calculators, that kind of financial support, and various training things there in those courses. And then under the professional development, we're looking at trips to visit graduate schools. We're looking at help with grad applications, research experiences, international research experiences. Our program has a flagship experience in Costa Rica that's fully funded by LSAMP. And then we're leveraging another existing NSF program that does mathematics in Uzbekistan, that's half funded by LSAMP now and sends our students. And then on sort of overlapping that, so for our campuses that are more student academic success supported, we ask that they really do more of those sort of onboarding, student academic activities. Those who are more professional development focused have more in the research area. And then those who are both do all of it. And then for all campuses, we require a series of activities that are based on sense of belonging, student cohesion, things like that. We feel that that overrides the other two areas. So we want our students to feel part of the STEM community, to feel part of their campus community, to have community with each other. And so we require all campuses to do that. So the activities evolve through time by adding international research, by more emphasis on research. I think our approach to allowing campuses to have the flexibility to use NSF funding to support the areas where we don't have institutionalization in place yet, and to really get the students the support where they need and leverage their own strengths, that's what's really evolved over time. So we keep adding activities. We're not adding dollars. So we're trying to, yeah, like I said, give campuses flexibility to leverage other dollars and increase their impact, because as you can imagine, with 3,000 students spread across 23 campuses, their needs are very varied. And I'll stop there and let my colleagues jump in.
Absolutely. I think that you touch on one of the most important aspects of what we have been doing over the years, and that is the development of support structures for our students. And they take on many shapes and forms, and it depends on whether they are first generation college students or not. But the bottom line is that these support structures have been developed with support from the National Science Foundation, but also with the vision of the different alliances. So I would ask Dr. Ernest Chavez to contribute.
Thank you, Ben. So what can I add to that? Colorado and Wyoming, I've been with the program about 12 years. I was the department chair of psychology and brought the LSAMP program into our department. It had been housed in engineering and then for some reason got moved to the graduate school, which made no sense to me. So we brought it into the psychology department as part of the Tri-Ethnic Center, which is a center that does prevention research. And started looking at different things. Omnia Al-Hakim started this program 25 years ago at Fort Lewis College in Southern Colorado. And now it's grown. We're now not 20, but actually 13 institutions. But we account for 95% of all the STEM degrees granted by the state of Colorado. So we and along with what Dr. Hammersley was talking about, we have R1 institutions and smaller four-year institutions and 2 community colleges. And so each of those has cultural differences in terms of what they're needing to do and how they need to do it. And what we found, we've been working consistently to try to kind of maintain the vision and what we want, but allow the individual institutions dealing with within their own culture on how they're going to approach those different tasks. One of the things we found is that spending some money to create a state-of-the-art website. Our previous website was dog food. And so we spent some money and created something that actually is usable. And we've been trying to put our high impact practices on the site and drive folks to the site for more availability of what's going on. And part of our plan in the future is to highlight these high impact practices in each of our monthly meetings, and then have institutions talk about how they might be able to implement that same program on their campus. Again, understanding that Metropolitan State College, which is a Hispanic serving institution in the middle of Denver, is radically different than University of Colorado Boulder in terms of, or the Colorado School of Mines. So I think that's some of the things we're trying to do.
And there's a significant number of high impact strategies that have been developed through LSAMP and other programs nationwide. I should point out that the American Association of Colleges and Universities did a study around 2014, and they highlighted some of the best practices around that we could implement and hopefully sustain in the long run. So Dr. Chavez, thank you for that point. I'm going to ask Dr. Butler-Purry to perhaps focus on what she has seen happen and change in terms of programmatic activities with community colleges. Dr. Butler-Purry, are you there?
Okay, yes, I am.
Good.
And happy, to talk about that. I think one thing Dr. Jones mentioned was sort of the evolution of focus. And, so as a Senior Alliance, of course, we have experienced that evolution. And so early on, when we, talk about, recruitment, we had, many partnerships with community colleges within, the state of Texas, and really, trying to build those partnerships, then, students transferring into our different campuses in the Alliance. And over time, those partnerships really have evolved into many articulation agreements, and in some cases, actually dual enrollment agreements. An example, at Texas A&M, we have what we call the engineering academies, where we have students at different, some partner community colleges who are doing their first 2 years and being dual enrolled at Texas A&M. And so I would say that, that's kind of been the evolution, and, one of mutually beneficial, so the articulation agreements are designed to not only, benefit the 4-year institutions, but then also for those 2-year institutions to be able to claim those students as graduates. And so I would say that that's, been some of the evolution, particularly around community colleges. Well, yeah. Can't hear you.
I am sorry. I was about to say that what you have been doing at Texas A&M is truly a national model. Perhaps you want to share with the audience how many years you've been associated with the Alliance, and I'll ask the same question of Dr. Jones.
Right. Yes, our Alliance was established in 1991. So I think we were one of the original 5.
And you've been involved ever since?
And I have been involved since I came to Texas A&M in 1994. Actually, I started by actually just a faculty mentor for a student, and I've been in leadership since mid-2000s.
Fantastic. So, Dr. Jones, would you like to add something to what we've been discussing about programmatic activities and their evolution?
Sure, I can just add something, really 2 things very briefly. Our Alliance was established in 1993. I joined Chicago State in 1993 in the year 2000 as a project director for the Illinois LSAMP Alliance, assisting the late Mayor Wilson Comer, who was actually the one who spearheaded it at that time. And, I was at the helm of it from 2000 to 2017 until I went to the NSF as a rotator. But two things that I would like to point out is one kind of on the student side, and then the other, being on the research side, that we've seen. So one of the early things that we did was to establish what we call a center, a learning center, for these students would have a place where they can actually come and gather. And we saw it as kind of a safe place. And, in that center, a lot of different things, happened. And one of the earliest student activities, of course, was tutoring. So students would come to the center to be tutored. Well, as time progressed, we moved to tutoring, then we went into what we call peer mentoring, and did that for a while. And the latest thing that we've done in the last cycle is what we call the learning assisted model, which came out of Colorado, where essentially we have students that's actually in the classroom, sometimes participating with the instruction, and then outside the classroom, they're also doing the tutoring and the peer mentoring. So that kind of shows kind of the evolution, over time. That aspect is kind of dealing with tutoring, peer mentoring. The other part, of course, has been research. So that's been something early on from the very beginning that we always pushed. So first, we started with these summer programs, getting students involved. When the Alliance was in its infancy, and then we started moving into getting students to do internships with faculty. And one of the things that we saw with our institutions, that as the program started growing, it was really more students than actually faculty, to participate or to lead the research. So that's when we started looking at other things. So for example, international experiences. One area that we really pushed hard at and actually did a great job at was actually getting students and faculty involved in national labs. So we have had active partnerships with Argonne National Laboratory and Fermi Labs, which is in our backyard. Also Lawrence Berkeley Lab, Lawrence Livermore, the CERN and Brookhaven National Lab. And in our 26 years or so, we have sent nearly 200 faculty and students to actually do work and participate in programs there. But something that we just did, which really was a brainchild of Dr. Chris Botenga, who's currently serving as the project director, is something that we call the TERT program, and that's for Technology and Engineering Research Toolkit. So as all of our institutions, our students are very complicated, and a lot of times over the summer, they can't necessarily participate in research. So early on, even before pre-COVID, we had these opportunities where students can actually participate remotely, in research. Especially when you're dealing with computer science and some of the technology-driven type things. So with this TERT program, when we did go into the COVID environment, we were actually able to transition quite nicely because we already had that in place.
Right. And I'm thinking about the learning centers that you mentioned earlier. And to me, one of the most fascinating aspects is that if you build it, they will come, right? Mm-hmm. They will come. Another lesson that I learned early on was that you had to build it in the right place. So real estate is everything. So thank you so much, Dr. Jones, for your thoughts on this area. So I am going to move on to the next question and ask Dr. Chavez to perhaps tell us a little bit about the activities and how they have been institutionalized in the Colorado-Wyoming Alliance. Dr. Chavez.
Well, I think at a number of our institutions, that is a difficult question in terms of how to change the culture and how to become a more obvious player in the institution in terms of making those changes. My metaphor for changing higher education is it's like turning a super tanker in the ocean. You better plan to do it really early and give it a lot of time because it takes a long time for it to turn. And we have such cultural differences across our institutions that I think, to be perfectly honest, I think we've made strides, but I think that many of the I'll give you one example. We were looking at our data to see how our programs had facilitated WebAMP and compared our WebAMP data to our state data to see what information we had. And in general, what I saw is that we weren't increasing the numbers of our students beyond the demographic increase that we were seeing of students within this 18-year-old demographic. That our programs were maintaining students better than they have been in the past, so that our graduation rate the numbers of STEM majors has increased, and the graduation rate for STEM majors for underrepresented students was better than for other students. But I didn't see us making the dramatic improvements that I had hoped that we would make. We were just kind of treading water with the increasing demographic changes that we were seeing in Colorado. And so we've tried to look at how do we expand that experience? Because to be quite honest, we can pat ourselves on the back with what great improvement we've shown. But if I take the population parameter out, it's relatively flat. And then one other piece, we try to focus quite a bit on Native Americans folks because of the Native American groups, both in Wyoming and in Colorado. And those curves are relatively flat and remain that way. We're not seeing the increases that we are with African American students and Latina students in our state. So that's another emphasis for us of trying to look at, we have 2 Native serving institutions, which is really unusual. And we try to enhance the work with those 2 to see what we can do to increase numbers. And one thing adding on to what Dr. Jones said about international experiences, I would argue that when engineering students can see how their thermodynamics class, and don't ask me to explain thermodynamics, Dr. Flores, remember, I'm a psychologist. When they can see thermodynamics in action, putting up solar arrays or doing whatever, all of a sudden, the research experience and those classes become more realistic to them, and it meets their communal needs to reach out and help their community. Even though they may not, at the time they're taking the class, quite understand how this connects to helping my people. When you go out there in the field and see how it works, it, I think, increases the excitement and energy with those groups.
One of the questions that I read in the Q&A session had to do with developing a sense of community. And what I have seen with Native American students is that they really care about their communities. So everything that they're learning had to keep in mind that in their minds, they're also thinking about how they can help their communities. Could you say something about that, Dr. Chavez, perhaps in a minute or 2?
The evidence, so I've only seen a couple of studies that have looked at this. Montana State and AMP up there did one. And they found that not only was it helping their community, but it was specifically helping their individual tribe. If they could not see that connection, the likelihood increased that they would drop out. Now, we've seen the same thing with women and other underrepresented groups in terms of if they don't see that connection because of communal values, that they are more likely to leave. But if COVID has shown us anything, it has shown us that science impacts, especially our underserved communities, even more dramatically than it does majority communities. And that the science involved in understanding illness, health, water, land is vitally important to the Native communities on the reservation and to the folks who have moved into urban areas. So I think the data is pretty clear that if we can't figure out ways to develop our curriculum in a manner which helps students to see how it's connected to their groups, that's problematic.
That's absolutely right. Dr. Hammersley, would you like to add a few thoughts about institutionalization and sustainability for the audience?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing when you in a really long-term alliance, because it can be difficult to kind of see the impact that you've had. Like you are the ship that takes a long time to turn. So one of the things that we've noticed as I'm writing my annual reports, when I set goals for the number of students who are going to participate in this and that, I'm finding that some of the things in the academic support area, the numbers of students we're reporting are going down. And it's not because students don't have access to those kinds of activities. It's because our campuses are providing them now for all students. And it's not being funded by the grant anymore. And we actually can't track our students in those activities anymore, even though they're based on the models that we developed. So I think, academic excellence workshops, the form of supplemental instruction, those were really implemented early on in the CSU by the LSAMP program. And it's now fully accepted and now centrally supported by the Chancellor's Office of the CSU as a supplemental instruction program. So you kind of have to be able to see the whole history to see those things that are now so fundamental to what our institutions are doing as having those roots in the LSAMP program all those years ago. And I think I'm also seeing that in the increasing numbers of offices of undergraduate research. And we're increasingly seeing our student support programs funded by various sources all being put into these centralized student support offices. So again, that message of the LSAMP program about looking at sustainability, looking about leveraging resources, the outcomes are there in the way that our campuses are approaching student support and pulling together multiple funded programs under a single roof to be able to leverage, to use campus resources to leverage those programs fully. So it's kind of an interesting, it's always really tricky. And I think we saw some questions earlier when you're writing a proposal and you want to talk about sustainability, it's a long-term result, right? So it's got to be sort of setting the seeds for the changes that you think can be there. And I think as a program like LSAMP, which is unique in how many years it's been around, it's uniquely able to point at changes, to whole institutional changes that have emerged from the early work of this program. So those are the only specific examples I can come up with, but I see the roots, the LSAMP roots, in a lot of things that the CSU is doing now.
Right, and one of the things that I've noticed, and this is a lesson from industry, is that if you are really aiming at changing the culture of an institution or an alliance of institution, it's going to take time. You cannot do this over 10 years. You're going to see a difference over perhaps 15 years. And that's one of the amazing things about the LSAMP vision as a whole of the program, is that from the very onset, NSF was thinking about this change in culture and realizing that it was going to take a long time. So LSAMP is one of the longest running programs in the National Science Foundation. And so that's absolutely, I think, essential to understand. We are having a lot of fun with these conversations right now. Time is running so fast that I'm afraid we're not going to get to all the questions unless we move on. So I'm going to ask Dr. Butler-Purry to tell us a little bit about the contributions that her alliance has made in changing the culture of partnering institutions. So we're addressing the issue of culture change now.
Thank you, Ben. So I think my answer somewhat also goes back to the institutionalization. And so if you don't mind, I'll maybe pull a little bit, from that. I think something that's been really critical, I mentioned this a little earlier, is that, the idea, first of all, with collaborations. I think we have, from the beginning, collaborated with the academic units. And if I think about, so for example, in our early years, at Texas A&M, our LSAMP was, an integral partner with the College of Engineering, and at Prairie View with the College of Engineering, and at Corpus Christi, Texas A&M Corpus Christi, with their College of Science. And so we were partnering in, when the first phase of recruitment, and partnering on things, like bridge programs and summer camps, right? And then as we moved on to retention and supplemental instruction. And so those things remain on our campuses and really are institutionalizing, not exactly, the LSAMP model, but LSAMP was a partner in, looking at those aspects and related to underrepresented minority students, but then even to the broader, set of students. And so I think, now we are in, this, I guess, 20 something years later, and we're focusing on, undergraduate research, from another perspective, like mentor development. So some more, adding more best practices, to this. And I think that's, how we have, perhaps, been able to be a part of the change, in the culture, and also have some things be institutionalized, is because we have, collaborated and continue to always collaborate. Now at Texas A&M, we're not just engineering, we actually are all of our STEM colleges, and we collaborate with them all to, look at, the programmatic efforts, that we have. And likewise at, Corpus Christi, Texas A&M Corpus Christi is now science and engineering. And so that would be sort of my answer, there. I already sort of talked about how some of our findings from our bridge to doctorate efforts really laid a foundation for efforts, not only at Texas A&M, but we actually have a system, AGAP. And so also then on, the campuses that are in our LSAMP or in our AGAP.
It's hard to imagine about 15 years ago that, campus was really talking at large about mentoring. And that has changed significantly over the years. And what Texas A&M has done in that area is quite significant. I'm going to ask Dr. Jones to contribute to this.
Sure, Ben, thank you so much for that question. Two things come to mind. The first thing is, as the lead institution, really kind of promoting the importance of broad participation to the senior leadership at the various institutions. And, that was done during the governing board meetings. So really stressing, why it's important to broaden participation and diversify the workforce. And that really helped, to change the culture at the partner institutions, because, for the most part, these either the president, chancellors, or provosts were the PIs, for that particular institution. So they provided kind of the institutional muscle, in a sense, to change the culture there. The second thing that I saw, with us, over the last 26 or 28 years, we've typically had about 15 partners, and it's been a mix of 4-year institutions as well as 2-year institutions, as well as other type of institutions like Argonne National Laboratory, or currently the Field Museum of Natural History. But one of the things was, when you looked at those institutions, especially the bigger ones, they really needed guidance on how to implement these broadening participation programs. And Chicago State, being a predominantly Black institution, or one of our other partners, Northeastern Illinois University, being a predominantly Hispanic institution, we were able to share that with the partner so they know how to correctly approach it, on their campuses. And that also did a lot to change the culture on their campuses.
Very good. We have a few minutes left, so I'm going to move on to the last question, and perhaps we can start with Dr. Chavez. What is the most important lesson that you've learned over the last 25 plus years? Dr. Chavez.
I think, sorry, I had to find my mouse. I think that in looking over when I took this, so I agree with previous things folks were saying. So when the site coordinator was focused in engineering, as it was at the University of Colorado, then the LSAMP program was very well known within the College of Engineering and not well known in arts and sciences. And when it was in the College of Sciences, as it was at Colorado State University, then engineering wasn't as involved. And part of what Dr. Butler-Purry said, which is expanding that disciplinary action and getting more of the STEM programs involved with each other. And also what I just learned, I think that what Dr. Hammersley said about the fact that some of the things that have changed over the years have become institutionalized. The BOLD Center at the University of Colorado, which is an engineering outreach program, has been significantly funded or partially funded by LSAMP over the years. And now it's institutionalized entirely in the engineering department there. And so there are these, so it is possible that we've, as she was saying rather dramatically, that we've lost sight sometimes of the changes that we have made because we've been swimming in them for so long. So I think working at these individual cultures, and COVID has allowed us, it's something that came out at the LSAMP conference that we had last weekend, I think, which is, it's made it a little easier for us to use Zoom to connect at our distant campuses. Who knew COVID would do some blessings in the experience, but that is one of them, that we can connect in this manner with each other and build a better sense of how to shift culture at our various, very culturally different institutions.
That reminds me of work that was done in South Dakota at one of the tribal colleges, and they worked so hard in developing an infrastructure so that they could communicate virtually. And this happened about 20 years ago. And so that predates what most of us have been doing, of course, but you know, there are some lessons to be learned from everybody. Thank you, Dr. Chavez. Dr. Hammersley, your thoughts?
On the most important lessons learned?
Absolutely.
I think it's really, again, it's important not to lose sight of the fact that what we do works. And, you know, we see that in our long-term results. It's another unique thing of a program that lasts this long. For our alliance, over 23 campuses, they're all part of the same system. We can do a lot of comparison with our students, and we have closed the opportunity gap for the students who are participating in our programs. And we're seeing some of them. We have professors in the CSU now who were undergraduates in the LSAMP program years ago. So, you know, I think that is, you know, the thing that we have, that we keep saying loudly and clearly. And I want to echo something that Dr. Chavez said earlier about the programs that have these GPA caps. I think the point of what we're doing is trying to remove barriers from students who will experience success if we can just take those barriers out of the way. This isn't about capability or ability, it's about barriers. And, you know, and so when we're talking about the pipeline and expanding the pipeline, we can't do that if we focus on what we see as those high quality students. Because then again, it's like placing all of the onus on the students and not on the reasons why not all students might academically on paper look the same. And, you know, so in our alliance, and especially in our Bridge to Doctorate program, we're very explicit in saying we're doing exactly what Dr. Chavez said. We're finding the students who have great potential and giving them the support they need to realize that potential. And he's absolutely right. So I'm just going to repeat it. When we do that, we just see them take off and fly. So, you know, I think that's the most important lesson learned, that it's the thing that drives me to keep doing this every day, is the outcomes for our students are really impactful.
That's so true. One could summarize some of what you say by saying that talent is everywhere, right? And the idea is to identify it and help them join the universities and colleges that our alliances are part of. Dr. Jones, would you like to say a few words about the most important lesson learned?
Sure. You know, one of the things that I have really enjoyed over the last 21 years with the Alliance, and especially during the PIPD meetings, just learning what different people do, you know, on their campuses and how it changes depending on whether you're on the West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, South, North. Very, very innovative. But one of the things that I've also learned, in order for those programs to really be successful, you got to have three pieces, kind of working simultaneously. The first thing is you got to have a project director that's really passionate about, the goals of the LSAMP program. And then once you identify that person, you have to have some really faculty that are kind of engaged in the process. And then, of course, the last thing is you have to have the support, of your senior administration. So without those three pieces kind of working hand in hand, I don't care how innovative the program is, you really won't be able to move the needle. And that's one thing that I must say with the LSAMP program. When you look at the successful programs across our nation, they have all three of those working hand in hand to really make those programs successful.
Very well said. Support from all sides, right? That's critical. Dr. Butler-Purry, your thoughts?
Yes. So thinking about something maybe somewhat unique, trying to build on what others have said, I would say it's, maybe leveraging with other NSF programs. I think that is extremely critical in being able then to sort of infuse LSAMP throughout your campuses. I would say over the years, we found, for example, partnering with faculty in, early career awards. So, being able to offer our partnership as something that really could benefit them, but then also benefit us. We've partnered with RETs that our campuses have had, REUs. I mentioned, AGAP, and I think what it allows you to do is then really to connect with more faculty, right? And get your students exposed to more faculty and staff, and, hopefully, then have LSAMP not operate as a silo, but really a part, of the overall campus. So.
That's true. That's true. You need to work with faculty. You need to find those champions that are going to help you change the culture. Thank you so much. So I'm going to move on to the last item that we have and really it's just an opportunity for our audience to ask questions of our panelists. We have a question that has this, how important was the sustained support from the National Science Foundation in making your programs last decades? How important was the sustained support from NSF?
I'd just say critical. I mean, when you're talking about having the support of your upper administration, to be able to say, look at this program, look, NSF has been supporting this for this many years, and this is not what NSF does. It really helps get the attention of the upper administration and their support. So absolutely critical.
Just real quickly, I certainly agree with Dr. Hammersley. Chicago State, especially being a public institution, every year since I've been here, the support from the state to the institution has decreased. So you're always competing for funds. And one of the strategies that we've always had in the Illinois Alliance is try to point to the strategic plans of the university to show how critical this is in retention, promotion, and graduation. So it has been absolutely critical for our Alliance as well.
Dr. Chavez?
We couldn't have done it, any of this kind of the work we've done without the support from NSF. I think that we, as the Texas institutions, or as Dr. Jones was mentioning, all have had reduced funding from the state, and we've become profit centers. We're essentially private institutions running at the margins from state support. I do think I wanted to bring something up that when I did a presentation at the for the New Mexico AMP. When they came on board, they were able to garner funds from their state legislature to help fund their LSAMP. I wish we would have done that at one point. And that gives them a base of funds that allows them to work from beyond what NSF has done, but it was built into the program many, many years ago. So there are ideas out there that some of the LSAMPs have done that are incredibly innovative that other potential amps, LSAMPs could consider and try to, if they have supportive legislators, not like some states.
And the National Science Foundation has made that recommendation time and time again to talk to our legislators in the state. And you're absolutely right, Dana. What Dr. Ricardo Jaquez, the late Ricardo Jaquez, did for the New Mexico Alliance just speaks volumes, because through the support of the state, they have been able to do things that would have not been possible across the entire state of New Mexico. Thank you for your answers. I believe, Dr. Chavez, how can we learn to do that today? That was a question. I'm not sure what the question is really about. What?
Working with the legislature,
Yes,
would be,
probably,
I assume. Yeah. So I do think that regardless of whether you're in a red or a blue state, so if you are in a red state, I would think changing the vocabulary related to support that you need and using a different sense of words. Because of Colorado being within the district we have been unable to give ethnic racial scholarships for years because of being in the federal court district area that we are. But switching over to first generation, support for first generation, since so many of our students are first gen or Pell Grant or however, so that there isn't this opposition, but approaching legislators related to, and this is a piece I think that I would like to see more of, the extent to which by increasing the number of individuals receiving bachelor's degrees in science, increasing the taxable revenue of those states, increasing the ability for those states to bring high-tech or tech industries into those states. That's, you can start to sell yourself in those ways that this is part of what we're about. And this is part of what we're trying to do, is to bring science to everyone that is a member of the country community and not just to the few.
Right. Dr. Butler-Purry, would you like to say something about what we can do to work with our legislators?
Right. So,
or the chancellor.
Yeah. So I was, going to say, I think, it really also, depends on sort of the regulations that you're operating under that time. We have, Hopwood has sort of guided us, right, in the state of Texas since the 2000s. And so we, of course, are not able to make awards based upon racial identity. And so we, have found other ways and other language, just as was said about first generation, or partnering with institutions that have high minority populations and stuff like that. I think that we have, tried to leverage when we could with our legislatures, but I think we've had champions in our system. You mentioned the chancellor, and really perhaps, trying to get support for efforts, those kinds of ways. So I don't have any real solutions about, how we might do that with the legislature. I will say that, I guess, Miss Ernie Bernice, right? So I think that, from Dallas area, I've had an opportunity to interact with her and, sort of championing LSAMP. And so I think there are friends that we're able to do that, but it's not across the board opportunities available. I'll leave it at that.
That's true. That's true. So one of the things that I'm looking at here right now is time. I think we've run out of time. So I wanted to thank everybody, all of our audience, for taking the time on this Friday to be with us, and to our panelists. Thank you so much for your insight. You are true believers, and I really appreciate it. And I'm thankful to be consider myself your friend. So thank you so much for everything, and we'll see you soon. You take good care.
Thank you, Ben, for your leadership.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben, and everyone else. Bye.
All
Thank
right,
you,
bye-bye.
everybody. Goodbye.